So as soon as I book a flight or book accommodations or tickets for something, I simply email that to my TripIt account and it keeps everything for the trip in one place. So that's super easy. It gives little updates and notifications, which I love. We actually have access to a service called Chexi. Last December, I wanted to go somewhere for a weekend and figured it would be cheaper to go overseas than it would be to stay in Canada. So I found a cheap cash flight through Google Explorer and popped over to Mexico for 2.5 days.
Hey there, points people! You just heard a clip from Tara McAndrew from Travel with tmc. Tara is a Canadian travel blogger who has traveled the world for more than a decade using points and miles. In this episode, expect to hear about tips to stay organized with points and miles without needing to download a whole bunch of different apps, what programs are best for Canadians looking to get into points and miles, why Tara does not focus on airline or hotel status even though she travels pretty regularly, and so much more. Speaking of Canada, Air Canada Aereoplan points can get you some amazing value, even if you're American and you don't have plans to travel to Canada. You can often also find flights with other Star Alliance partners booked through Aereoplan for fewer points than the actual airline would charge for its own metal. One way to boost your Aereoplan balance is by transferring points to a card such as the Chase Sapphire Preferred Card. This card earns 3 points per dollar on dining and 2 points per dollar on travel. And remember, if you decide to apply for the Chase Sapphire Preferred Card or any other card, please never apply directly through Google. Always use a friend or creator's referral link. And if you are interested in supporting this show when you apply for your next card, check out geobreezetravel.com/cards. And if you're not sure what card is right for you, I offer free credit card consultations at geobreezetravel.com/consultations. And we have links to the Chase Sapphire Preferred Card and the free consultation form for you in the show notes as well. And now, on with the show. Welcome to the GeoBreeze Travel Podcast, a show for anyone wanting to level up their travel hacking lifestyle. I'm your host, Julia Menez. I'm a travel hacker, coach, speaker, Filipino-American ENTJ who loves solid travel gear and using shortcuts on spreadsheets. On this show, I'm on a mission to bring you travel hackers from all walks of life to help you level up your travel hacking game. We dive into credit cards, miles, points, strategy, mindset, and the secrets behind how to travel the world for next to no cost. So, let's get hacking. Hey Tara, welcome to the GeoBreeze Travel Podcast.
Hi, Julia. Thanks for having me.
I am so excited to have you here and to talk about how to stay organized with points and miles. And I think this episode is going to take a different turn than what most people are expecting. Because I think most people are like, oh, you need this app and this app and this app, and here's all of the different apps that I'm using. When really, you probably don't need that many. So we'll talk about how to juggle everything with points and miles and stay organized without downloading 10 million apps. But before we get into all of that, tell us about you. How did you get into the game of points and miles?
Oh gosh, being a broke university student that wanted to travel. I think it's one of those things where when you have a lack in one area, you get resourceful and creative in others. So, as you said, my name is Tara. I run the website Travel with tmc, and I have been living and traveling abroad for about 12 years now, and using points for, I would say, about 8 to 10 of those years, or learning about and using them for about that long. Yeah, I paid my way through university and all I wanted to do was travel, and I just started going down the rabbit holes. But at that time, it was all American information, and I'm Canadian. Some of it applied to me, but not everything. And nowadays, we're lucky there are a lot more options. I'm on a bit of a mission to help share for Canadians how they can get started and how they can travel hack and see the world too.
For context, you've been doing this for 12 years. How much are you traveling each year these days?
Oh, that depends. Last year was decent. I was back out in the world internationally a fair bit again, but this year I'm actually deciding to slow down a little bit more. For the first time, I'm planning no travel for this summer. I spent all of May overseas and in different places, and in October I'm going places, and in March I was away, but I'm I've chosen for like 3 months this year to do absolutely no travel at all. And we had the pandemic mixed in there as well. So that was a lot of locally focused travel. But prior to the pandemic, I was gone like all of 2019. I lived overseas for a few years in a couple different countries. So yeah, it's changed a lot over the last 10, 12 years.
Fund a lot of this with points and miles and credit cards still, or are you more just finding cheap cash fare deals? How are you affording to live abroad so much of the year?
Yeah, great question. I've gotten into a lot more spontaneous travel lately. So last December, I wanted to go somewhere for a weekend and figured it would be cheaper to go overseas than it would be to stay in Canada. So I found a cheap cash flight through Google Explore and popped over to Mexico for 2.5 days. But a lot of the flights that I take now are points related, I would say, more so than like cheap cash fares.
We have a few Canadians who listen to this show, not nearly as many as we have in our American audience, but whenever we have non-Americans listening to the show, they're always like, how do I earn points if I can't
Yeah.
get all of these US credit cards? What do you do?
Yeah, we actually have a decent amount available to us in Canada. There are a couple key ones like the Amex Cobalt, which is fantastic if you eat out a lot or if you grocery shop at certain places. TD and CIBC both have co-branded cards with Aeroplan, as does Amex. And for any Canadians listening, Aeroplan is the best, I would say, program for Canadians, but American Express, you can also transfer their points if you're into wanting a charge card. Those are great options too. We've got all sorts of options now. Not near as many as the Americans, but we've got options out there.
So, with all of the different options that you have, let's start with how do you even pick what card to get next? How do you stay organized with that?
Yeah, this is a great question. I actually go through this with my clients. So when I'm doing travel coaching with them, a lot of them either have never heard of travel hacking before or points and miles, or they have points and miles accumulated but don't know what to do with them. So I actually offer my clients a spreadsheet to begin that's based off of their monthly spending habits. And then with each of the different cards, it'll tell them approximately how much they would earn each month and help them make a more informed decision on which card applies best to A, their spending, but B, their travel goals. Because you could get any travel card, but is it going to achieve what you want it to, both in terms of destination and frequency and which class of flight you'd like to be in? You don't know that unless you've gone through all the data points. So I use a spreadsheet for that to help my clients out.
That makes sense. A lot of people are always like, oh, I saw this really good promo. Should I jump on this? We have Southwest Companion Pass, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, where do you want to travel on points?
Yeah.
And then they'll say, oh, I want to go to Australia. To which then we're like, Southwest, surprise, does not fly over to Australia. So that's not really going to help you. So I always recommend to people work backwards, kind of like what you said. Figure out where you want to go, figure out who flies there, what are you going to redeem your points on, and then let that determine what card to get. How do you stay organized with all the different cards that you have once you've accumulated some? Do you have a tracker? Do you just have a binder? Do you just have post-it notes? What are you doing to stay organized with all of the cards?
Yep, I've got another Excel sheet for that. So it's, got everything from the application date and the issuer to the card name and the sign-up bonus that I'm expecting to the reward programs, renewal dates, all that sort of good stuff. In addition to the spreadsheet, which is another tool I provide for my clients, I also just put reminders in my phone. If I know I'm coming up to the end of an MSR, like a minimum spend requirement time period, I'll set a reminder like a month before to make sure that I'm going to hit that and get the sign up bonus. And then I'll also set a reminder like a month before the card is to renew in case it's one that I don't want to keep. Those two tools come in pretty handy.
Is there a reason you prefer doing this the manual way with spreadsheets and calendars rather than using different apps? Because I know that some people are like, oh, I like to use Travel Freely to track these, or I think Max My Rewards does some of this as well. But I've also heard like a growing number of people who are just like, I just use G Suite or I just use Google Calendar or Apple apps.
Yeah.
What drove that decision for you?
I think the KISS method, to keep it simple. Yeah, I think whatever works best for each individual is the best tool that they could use. And for me, It's easy to manipulate a spreadsheet. You don't need to get into all sorts of different functions and formulas in it for it to be an effective tool. You can use it at a very basic level, and it does the job for me. And as far as like reminders and calendars go, those are tools that I use every day. So it's not an extra app for me to download, and it's not an extra part of my life that I have to think about. It's just integrated into everything else that I'm already using. And all of these things are free. So that is more accessible for everybody too, which I really like when I'm talking with clients.
For sure. These apps usually are pretty cheap, where it's $5 a month, $10 a month, but they can add up if you have 5 different apps that you're using, one to track points, one to track cards, one to figure out which card to use, one to figure out trips. If you have $5, $10 monthly apps, that's $50, and that can add up really fast.
Yeah, and I feel like people in the points and miles game, they pay attention to the little pieces here and there, right? Yeah. Better to have that 5 to 10 bucks a month in your pocket to spend on your vacation.
How do you determine which card to use on a given purchase? Because once you've amassed 6 or 8 or more cards, then you're like, one's my gas card and one's my grocery card, and I don't remember which one's which. How do you stay afloat on all of that?
Yeah, part of it you end up knowing over time once you've got a certain set of cards in your wallet that you just rotate between. But for starting out, I go back to that expense prediction sheet that I use for clients at the beginning, where we've got all of the monthly amounts that you would spend on. So we can say, right, you get 5 points per dollar on dining out and groceries for the Amex Cobalt. I'm going to drop that every time. And if it's not accepted, then I can follow up with a Visa that's co-branded with Aereoplan, let's say, or RBC Avion if somebody's earning those points. But typically I say use the Amex first. And if you have a couple, you can keep, like, I have little wallet cards that I give to people, but you can, we talked about this earlier. I know somebody who puts Post-it notes on their credit cards so that they know, use it for this scenario or use it for that scenario. And the other thing is too, if I'm working on an MSR, I'll just use that card for everything to make sure that I hit the spend, and then I'll swap it out of my wallet, like on an as needed basis, bring it back in if that makes sense, or just stop using it altogether.
Yeah, I tend to follow a pretty close method as well, where I always tell my clients, plan A, just use whatever card you got most recently. Make sure you meet the minimum spend on it, and then you can decide if you're still going to use it after that. Plan B, I do recommend to a lot of newer people the Card Pointers app, because it does all of the math for you, especially with the US cards, because we have rotating category bonuses and so many other things. I usually say Plan B is the Card Pointers app. Just the free version of it should be good enough to tell you which one to use for gas and groceries and everything else. And then Plan C, just get a card that has like a flat 2x points
Right.
everywhere. Capital One Venture, Capital One Venture X, Amex Blue Business Plus. There's a lot of cards that will earn at least 2 points per dollar everywhere. Or there's free cards like the Chase Inc. Business Unlimited or the Chase Freedom Unlimited that earns 1.5 points per dollar everywhere. So if you're just like, I don't want to do any of this, just get one of those cards that earns you 1.5 or 2 points everywhere, and you'll be fine like 80% of the time with that.
Yeah, definitely.
And like you mentioned, once you're in the habit of using your cards, you just start to know which one's for dining, which one's for groceries, which one's for gas. And I have the Bilt card, so it's also just ingrained into me and my husband that, hey, if it's the first of the month, if it's rent day, use this card for double points, go out to eat, get 6 points per dollar. So we'll do something like that.
And for us in Canada, we actually have access to a service called Chexy. I'm working with them coming up. So for any Canadian who's listening to this, Chexy is a great way to pay your rent. We didn't have that opportunity until about a year ago. And you can use your Amex, you can use a Visa, you can use any card on that. So it's a great option for earning points on a lot of money that you're probably spending anyway.
That's an awesome tip. Is that just a Canadian thing?
I believe Chexy is just for Canadians as far as I'm aware.
Do they have any fees? I've never heard of this. Tell us about Chexy.
Yeah, definitely. So it's like a 2.5% fee, I believe, off the top of my head. I should know this since I've been using it for a while, but sometimes it gets lost in the dust upstairs. But yeah, it's pretty easy to use. You upload your lease, you set up your payment information, and then each month it just gets directly deposited into your landlord's account. They don't have to be notified in advance. You can just go ahead and set this up on your own, and I've had no issues with it. Like, it's been smooth sailing. I'm earning enough points for a flight each year, so that's a bonus. And I get to stay in my apartment, so that works too.
And the question that everybody's going to ask, does it work on mortgage?
No, it does not. So rent, everybody.
And I'm guessing it only works on residential rent and not commercial rent. Is that correct?
I believe so, yeah.
So yeah, everybody in Canada we don't have Bilt up in Canada. You have something close. Bilt doesn't have any transaction fees, but it sounds like Chexy will cover most of the features of paying rent to your landlord. Even if they don't accept credit card or anything, you're
Yep.
still good to go.
No problem. Yeah, definitely. And the thing I would say about the fees for a service like this, like on an individual basis, figure out if the fee is worth it to you. For me, I know I'm going to redeem for a flight for sure. So when I do like my cost benefit analysis, I'm like, yeah, no problem. This is money I'm spending anyway. I'd rather get the points for it. For some people, they might not want to spend the extra money on the fees, but you have to make that decision on your own.
Speaking of points that you earn, how do you stay organized with knowing all of your points balances across many different credit card programs, airline programs, hotel programs? What do you use to organize that?
Yeah, I have a little note in my phone and it's just got each of the programs, and every 2 weeks to months I'll update where it's at. Just I'm always checking my balance to see how much money I've spent on my card, and while I'm doing that I can see my points simultaneously. So it's easy enough. With the Aeroplan app or the Air Canada app, it's literally just checking into my phone and I can see the number of points there. And I personally don't use any hotel programs, so I don't have to think about that. But people can stay, like, you can keep it simple with notes. And I know that there are apps out there for this as well. But yeah, again, keep it simple.
In the beginning, I used a Ward wallet, which is free for
Mm,
anybody who wants to try it. And you can link up your Chase accounts, your Amex accounts, all of those different ones, and have all of it in one dashboard, which is great when you're first starting out. Years later in the game, at least like half of the different accounts that I've linked up are like, you need to relink this, or like this link doesn't work anymore. And I just haven't, because there's so many of those different accounts where I check them enough to where I'm pretty sure I know the updated points balance. Like with Hyatt or American Airlines or Marriott, I'm pretty on top of my points balance just because I'm checking like how close I am to renewing status. So that's bucket one of my points, is like I already know what the balance is. Bucket two is like it's not going to change. Like I've had 30,000 points stuck in Qantas for a while. I'm not really flying with them. And as long
right.
as those points don't get stolen, like I'm pretty well aware of those. And then bucket three is just like I don't care. I've never used these points. They're miscellaneous. It's such a small number of points with like various airlines that I flew once. It's got 900 points. I'm like, I don't need to keep track of these. So after a while, you just start to memorize your points balances with the programs that you actually care about, and then everything
Yeah.
else you don't have to worry about as much.
Definitely. And like you were saying there too, it funnels out. So it's not like you have to keep track of 10 or 15 programs. There'll be a handful that you'll be paying attention to, and that's so much easier to manage.
Yeah, that leads to another good point of if you are a beginner and you're already like transferring points to a dozen different programs and feeling overwhelmed to where you need to depend on something like a Ward wallet, maybe pare down on that a little bit, where you just need to know your Chase, Amex, Capital One, Bilt Balance, Citi, and just know that, plus maybe like some Hyatt points. You don't need to be memorizing and keeping track of 12 different programs, because why would you at that point? That's just way too much headache. And if you're spreading out your points that thin anyway, there's probably some bigger problems going on with just the strategy.
Definitely. And I think for the Canadians too, we have less banks to begin with and less programs to begin with. So it's kind of nice. We get a cleaner slate to work with off the top, unless you're a Canadian getting into the American game as well.
All right, we've talked about how to pick your cards. We've talked about how to figure out what cards to use, how to track all of your points. How do you track statuses and trips that you're taking? And am I going to renew Marriott or Hyatt this year? I know you mentioned you're not really into any hotel programs, but do you try to renew any statuses?
I don't know. For me, points and miles and flying and traveling and all this kind of stuff is a lot more destination and trip focused than I would say status focused, or yeah, like I'm not making the flight runs to get status. I'm thinking about where I'm going as opposed to how I'm getting there. And if points help facilitate me getting to where I want to go, then amazing. But I would say, even though I'm not doing that, you can use a colleague of ours, Josh from Prince of Travel. He mentions using Notion. And for anybody who's already using Notion, you can get as detailed as you want with that program. You can use color coding if you're into that. It's set up similarly to Google Sheets or Excel in terms of formatting, but I know that he gets into the weeds with that pretty well too. So if status and other things or bookings you're wanting to track particularly as well, Notion can be a great tool for that.
When I'm tracking my statuses, because the three that I pay attention to are American Airlines, Hyatt, and Marriott. I don't need a special website for that. It's all in the website and all in the app.
Yeah.
The Hyatt app is telling me exactly the progress bar of how close I am to 60 nights. Marriott is telling me exactly how close I am to 75. A lot of the programs where if you're really into a specific program, just download that program's app and it'll track it for you.
Definitely. And I know a lot of them send the emails too with the updates. So you can get like a monthly email if you're subscribed as well. And if you're not going into the app to check, you can also get the email updates.
You mentioned tracking trips on Notion. How do you track your trips specifically? Because you're all over the place in any given year. You've probably got half a dozen trips already planned. How do you organize all of your just itineraries?
Yeah, there's an app that I love. I'm gonna have an absolute brain fart on it right now. Give me 2 seconds. I've been using it for years actually. It's called TripIt. I don't know how I forgot about that, but I love using TripIt. So as soon as I book a flight or book accommodations or tickets for something, I simply email that to my TripIt account and it keeps everything for the trip in one place. So that's super easy. It gives little updates and notifications, which I love. The interface is clean and simple and all that kind of stuff, but that would be my go-to app. And then in terms of tracking the number of points that I use, and just from a nerdy perspective, wanting to see like how many points I used for Europe this time versus last time and how much cash I paid and all that kind of stuff, I just keep tracking notes again. But you could do that in a spreadsheet. You could do that in Notion. You could write it down on a piece of paper with a pen, whatever works for you sort of idea. But TripIt keeps my itineraries all together.
I am a huge fan of TripIt.
Yeah.
And my husband is constantly asking me, did you forward it to TripIt? Is it in the TripIt? Because you can share your TripIt itineraries, whether it's like all of the trips you're going on or just one trip that you're going on with a group trip, so that everybody can see, oh, so-and-so's landing at this point in time. If all of you are taking different flights into a destination, it's a really good way to just keep groups organized, as well as yourself, because I've probably got half a dozen trips in my TripIt. And it's super convenient to use. I don't know if I mentioned already, but it's free. And whenever you get like a confirmation email for a flight or hotel, you just forward it over to plans@tripit.com and they'll search and be like, oh, it's from Julia's email address. So it's going to go into Julia's profile and it'll organize all of your trips all nice and neat.
Yeah, it's an amazing app. I love it.
Also a great way to figure out like if you're crossing the international date line a lot. Did you book your hotels for the wrong dates? Because I do this all the time and it'll pop up those little warnings being like, you're missing a day of hotel or you're checking in before you physically land. So right. I love that app for those different things as well. Mm-hmm. How do you track finances? Because that's a whole nother part to this points and miles game, because I know influencers love to be like, it's free, all of it's free, or it's almost free. And I try to make cost breakdown videos being like, it's more like 90% off. So if it's $30,000 trip, still probably spend like $3,000 on it. What do you use for finance tracking?
Yeah, I love that you're asking this question, because I find, especially now with TikTok and everything else, you are hearing a lot of these mislabeled trips. So yeah, my sister calls me a dinosaur, and perhaps she's correct, but I track my finances in Microsoft Word or whatever that program is now. And that's only because, I can see your face. I know. That's only because I've been doing it for so long, so I'm sure that there are more efficient ways to do it, but I'm too lazy to go and research those right now, so I've stuck with that. It's gotten me through, made it through university debt-free, been doing well so far, so I keep on using it, but I'm open to ideas if people wanna toss them my way.
My husband and I used to use Mint, but
Oh, yeah.
that got sunsetted. So now we use an app called Empower to track investments and bank accounts and all of that, just to give a quick snapshot of this is your
Nice.
net worth. So
Awesome. Yeah, I
that's real.
used Mint for a time too, but I didn't like everybody does their expenses and budgeting differently, and I was like, "Oh, maybe I bought a gift at the superstore," which is a grocery store in Canada. I don't want it to go under groceries, so I would have to go in and, like, manually change things every so often. The idea for the app was cool though, but I just didn't like the application.
Oh, I don't even track the categories. I'm just worried about like how much money came in and how much money came out.
I
Sorry.
like the data. I get into the weeds.
Yeah, I don't get into the weeds. I'm just like, is our net worth not a disaster? Great. We're
Right.
good to go.
Yeah.
And so that's for just general personal finances. For organizing trip costs and everything, I have a spreadsheet that people see on my YouTube videos so that I
Nice.
just made that spreadsheet just so that I could show it on YouTube. And that's it.
Nice. Yeah, I use mine in notes, like, I just as I'm tracking each day, I'll just write, "This is how much I spent for the day," and, yeah, it's all in there afterwards.
For staying on top of credit card bills and everything, do you just have everything
Mm.
set up on auto pay or do you have a Word document for that as well? What are you doing for that?
I don't think I'm gonna live that one down. No, no Word document for that. I'd say I'm pretty on top of my finances, so for a couple of them, I get an email notification, like, "Your bill is ready, please pay it," and then I'll pay it. Yeah, I mean, it's
Manually?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think with being like so I'm self-employed and as you are too, and with being self-employed, like some months are fantastic and some months you're like money's coming in at different times. Maybe the company that you were working with hasn't paid you in a month and they're supposed to pay you last month. So I like to do it manually. And it takes like 20 seconds to do, so it doesn't bother me at all.
I would be so bothered. Everything's
Yeah.
online.
No, I feel also because everything is digital when it comes to money now, it doesn't always feel like the transaction is happening. And so when I do the manual payment, I'm like, right, money out or money in or whatever the scenario it is. It feels a bit more tangible.
Oh yeah, mine's not tangible. It's just all in the ether and it's all automated. And then sometimes my husband will run in and be like, it's not in the right account. And then we'll manually debug from there. But speaking of being self-employed, how do you track like here's business stuff versus point stuff? Because as a content creator where your business is traveling and you're using points and miles and everything, this is a question we get all the time from aspiring creators is
Yeah.
how do you stay organized and on top of that? And do you do your own accounting or have you driven an accountant crazy?
The account that I have right now is pretty awesome. They are somewhat familiar with the landscape that we're in with content creation, so that's been really helpful. I did do my taxes prior to that, but with the business and everything else, it's just easier to have a professional take care of it and make sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's dotted. Yeah, I let the people who know what they're doing do their job.
I do have an actual accountant who's like, what is happening? But I think my books are clean at this point. And it took me 3 different tries with accountants. The first one was like, they didn't really understand points. And the second one was a disaster. And then the third one is fingers crossed and knock on wood working out. So I hope that one continues. But yeah, books are clean at this point. But I highly recommend using a professional if you have all of these self-employed things, mostly because I don't want to go to jail. And
No, definitely. Yeah, I will say though, there's a program, so I do my own bookkeeping, and then I have an accountant who takes care of all the taxes and everything like that. For bookkeeping on a day-to-day basis for the company, I use a program called Wave. They have free and paid versions, but you can take pictures of the receipts to upload them, and it's a fantastic resource. I think I've been using it for about 2 years now, but for anybody who's got a small business or I don't know. I'm sure you could keep track of your personal finances that way too, but I use it for invoicing. I use it for keeping track of expenses, and it's fantastic. I love it.
Sometimes when you do different trips, you might want to use credit card A because it's going to earn more points at this hotel or for this flight. And that's not your usual business credit card. What do you do to get around that?
So I'm what's called a sole proprietor, or my business is what's called a sole proprietorship in Canada. So right now, I am the business. Like I am inextricably linked with the business. So which card I use doesn't matter so long as my books are balanced at the end of the year and the government's getting its taxes. Everybody's happy. If and when I get to the point where I want to take it to an incorporated level, then I will probably separate things a little bit differently. But for right now, the business is manageable and small enough as it's working right now that I don't have to worry about what cards I'm using so long as things are getting paid. And I'm fairly organized to begin with, so it's easy enough for me to keep track of.
I'm on the LLC side of things, so sometimes I'm like, well, we're going on a content trip and we're staying at Hyatt's and I want to use a Hyatt card. So what I do is I will Expensify stuff to myself. There's a free app and website called Expensify. It's pretty easy if you just are the only one who's in there. If you have an accountant or like employees, it gets kind of messy, kind of fast, honestly. But for people who are just starting out, Expensify is free. So I'll just fill out an expense report for myself and then just reimburse my personal account from my business account after submitting receipts. So just imagine you're at a normal corporate job filling out an expense report, except you are the business and also the employee that you're reimbursing. And that's how I'm able to still just use the most optimal card for any given airline or hotel expense and still be able to charge it to my business and have an accountant sign off on it. So Expensify is one of those apps that I like to use to stay organized too.
Thanks. That sounds like a great tool.
Any other tools that you like to use or that you recommend not using that you've heard of to stay organized in the world of points and miles?
I don't know if there's any right now that I would tell people to stay away from. I always say you need to use what works best for you. So for me in my dinosaur mode, it's Word for some things. And for like when I was speaking at the Travel Summit this past year, which you were at as well, one of the people in our audience literally uses Post-it notes on their cards to know what to use when, or if they have an MSR coming up. And that system worked for that person. So I was like, great, keep on doing it until it doesn't work for you anymore. I would say the same thing to anybody. Find something that works for you and then stick with it. And if it's not working, change it.
Has anyone ever said to you, Microsoft Word is for words?
My sister, every time. Yeah. She comes from the business background. I come from a languages background. So I don't know.
My sister is a graphic designer. And when I tried to do a mock-up of my wedding invitations in Microsoft Word instead of any actual graphic design thing, Canva wasn't a thing back then. When I got married, I shared a Microsoft document with her and she just replied back, Microsoft Word is for words.
For words. Yeah. That's great.
So I feel the same way about balancing a budget in Microsoft Word.
It's not so much balancing the budget. I guess I should clarify. I use it to track what I spent on a daily basis. And because I had started with that, I just didn't start doing it in Excel. I use Excel for some things for finances, but to figure out like, I don't know, what I've spent in whatever category, I just note it down in Word. Yeah. I don't know. It works. It's weird, but it works.
I think a lot of people assume I have 10 million different spreadsheets just because I was an actuary in a former life, but I actually just keep maybe one spreadsheet for client stuff and then one spreadsheet for the cost breakdowns that I show on YouTube. And I have very few spreadsheets that I actually maintain because I like to remind people that if you do really become advanced in something, that point is when you realize that thing is not the answer to everything. So if you're actually advanced in Microsoft Excel, you know that you shouldn't be using Microsoft Excel as a database. And when you actually become more proficient in points, that's where you start to realize, oh, points and miles is not the end all be all to everything. Sometimes it's worth paying cash and sometimes it's worth doing a little bit of a blend of the two. It's not if the only tool that you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Once you're past that point and you're like, I understand discerningly when to actually use these different tools, that's when I think somebody has reached a more intermediate or advanced mode.
Yeah, totally on board with you on that for sure.
Cool. So as we kind of wrap up here, what would you say is your number one tip for people who are getting into the world of points and miles? They're getting a little bit deeper and they just feel cluttered and unorganized and they're not sure how to stay afloat with everything.
Yeah, I'm going to hit this from two angles. One for the beginner, because I think for beginners, it can be super overwhelming. I mean, there's all of the forums and there are now all of the blogs and the YouTube channels and all this kind of stuff. What I would say is pick one as a good resource and stick with that until it no longer serves what you're looking for. And in terms of figuring out what cards to use or which programs to go with a backwards design approach that we talked about earlier. So figure out what are your travel goals, like how often in the year do you want to be traveling, class you want to fly in. So are you flying in economy? Are you going for the aspirational lie flat seats? And once you have an idea of the landscape that you're working with, then go and figure out which tool you're going to use, or tools if you need more than one, in order to reach those goals. So that's what I would say for the beginners. For the intermediates, if you're feeling overwhelmed, take a step back and assess everything that you have going on. And again, figure out, is everything still serving its purpose for you? If no, get rid of it or change it up or figure out something different that will make your life easier. And if everything looks better than you thought it did and you're getting just worked up in your mind and it's not an actual situational mess, then great, take a breather and book a flight to cheers yourself on the back, kind of thing.
Fantastic advice. And speaking of great advice, can you give a shout out to somebody else on the internet who you would recommend listeners follow for even more points and miles tips?
Yeah, oh gosh, we've got so many people. I'm gonna go with two Canadians, I think, just because that's my demographic typically. So colleagues in this, actually I'm gonna go with three if I can. So there's Anshul from Points, Miles, and Bling. He's out of Ottawa. Fantastic website. We've also got, of course, Bricky and the team from Prince of Travel. They're your go-tos for any aspirational travel that you're going for. And then my fellow Francophones over in Quebec, we've got Kevin and Andrew who run Fly Trippers, and they send out flight deals as well as information on points and miles in the Canadian landscape. Shout out to my fellow Canadians helping other Canadians travel.
Fantastic. And where can people find you on the internet?
My website is travelwithtmc.com, and TMC is spelled TMC and on Instagram at travelwithtmc. And I've also got a newsletter which people can sign up for either through the website or through Instagram.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again, Tara, so much for joining us on the show today and helping everybody to stay organized with their points and miles.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Julia. It was great to talk with you again.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the GeoBreeze Travel Podcast. If any of the cards mentioned in today's episode piqued your interest, please check out the links in the show notes for more information on any of the cards. Also, if you apply for a card using the links on that page, I may receive a commission too, so please and thank you. P.S. I hear the links work better in Internet Explorer or Safari, and sometimes the credit card applications tend to glitch out in Chrome. Additionally, it would mean the world to me if you could subscribe to this podcast, leave a 5-star review, and share it with a friend. And if you would like to make even more travel hacking friends, please sign up for the Patreon to access our monthly masterclass hangouts. We dive deep into a particular points program each month, and you'll get to ask all of your travel hacking questions and enjoy being around other people who enjoy points and miles just as much as you and I do. If you would like an invite to the next one, head over to geobreezetravel.com/hangouts to sign up to be on the invite list. Take care and happy travels!